Mr. Twinkles, it is time once again to throw aside caution and go into the darkest recesses of the darkest, most evil, most corrupt place in the world. No, I'm talking about the comment section on YouTube! Mr. Twinkles, give me a dream, ba-ba-ba, make it the cutest that I've ever seen. Oh, are we on? No, I'm ready. I'm good. We're good. Are you ready? Of course you're ready. He's a pro. He's always ready. Look at him. Always ready. Welcome to a... You want to do it? Let's go see what the YouTube comment section has to say. So we're going to take a look at some of the comments under Why the Creation Evolution Debate Matters from the Sin Hound collection. Sin Hound series was a couple of videos, and we're going to see, for the first time, what kind of comments we got. Light says, I still say this channel is a complete Poe. When you look at it that way, it's a much better channel. I don't know what that means, but thanks, Light. We're trying to be better all the time. I feel like I should be offended, but I don't know why, and I don't care enough to look it up. Ooh, Art Maven has a whole lot of things to say. It just makes me not care. All right, Art Maven, what do you got? Nope. Honestly, people never start with the word nope. In fact, don't include the word nope. Just nope. Just no. Don't nope. Don't nope, because it just, no. Okay, let's see what it is. You neglected to mention the many creation accounts from other cultures and religion. No, I didn't. No, oh my gosh. Okay, I'll read it. I'll read it. He says, you neglected to mention the many creation accounts from other cultures and religions, all of which are as well supported by evidence as the one in the Bible. Now, what this just shows, Art Maven, is that you have zero understanding of what biblical creation is or what any other creation story says, because they're not at all the same or in any sense equally defensible. This just shows absolute ignorance on your part of what I'm defending here, which probably also shows you didn't watch the video at all. Oh, wait, no. You quote something, so, oh my gosh. He's also starting with the word nope again. I can only take so many nopes, Art Maven. All right, let's see. I can do this. All right, the third option is evolution. Now, hold on. In his favor, all right, in the defense of Art Maven, let me just say, he quotes me and says when I say it. So, point for him there. If you're going to argue somebody's point, saying, here's what you said, and here's why you're wrong, let's see if he actually does that, though. But he starts off strong. He quotes me and tells me when I said that. So, the third option is evolution, aka Darwinism, aka atheism, aka materialism, aka state-mandated brainwashing. Nope. Oh, again, starting with the nope. Don't start with the nope. Don't even nope. Just don't nope. I'm going to put that on a t-shirt. Wrong on all counts. Okay, I get it. But he says more. First, the questions you listed are 1, why are we here? And 2, why is there something instead of nothing? These are questions best addressed by philosophy or religion. Science doesn't have the tools to deal with philosophical or religious matters. Science can only work with empirical, physical, and... Right, okay, yes, science and philosophy are different. I mean, I think science and philosophy definitely overlap a lot, and it just shows that if you try to separate the two, like Stephen Hawking, his last book was a book where he started off saying that science is king and philosophy is dead, and then the rest of the book was all the philosophy of science. It was Stephen. So the problem is these things overlap so much that this kind of artificial division of them does them all a disservice and an injustice, and actually just shows that you just haven't understood it. I've already said this before. I'm going to say it again. You cannot do science without first doing philosophy. You can't know anything before you first believe something. Case in point, what is science? Science is based on the observation of the world external to your perceptions. You are looking, you are listening, you are measuring. But before you can do that, to do the science, you have to first believe that the external world is real and that your perceptions are accurate. If you don't first believe the external world is real and that your perceptions are accurate, then you can't do science. But you can't use science to prove that the external world is real because you can't do science on anything other than the external world, which if it's not real, neither is the science. You have to first believe something you can't prove scientifically. And how do you prove your perceptions are real? By matching them with more of your perceptions? You have to believe your perceptions are real. So that doesn't make it irrational, it just makes it unscientific, which is why philosophy has to come before science, and if your philosophy is bad, the science that follows will be bad. But I mean, I agree in a sort of vague, ambiguous philosophical sense that religion and science are answering different questions. But the problem is that when religion and science are making claims about each other, they become one. All right, biblical creation, Genesis chapter 1, tells us where the heavens and the earth came from. Big Bang cosmology tries to replace that with something secular and different, starting with a rejection of Genesis 1, and then saying, well, okay, how do we explain the universe? That's what it does. And evolution too. Evolution is an attempt to explain, well, where did all these different kinds of plants and animals come from if Genesis is wrong? If we reject that first, now how do we explain worms and fish and lizards and people? That's where Darwinian evolution came from. The slow time gradualism didn't come from observation. It came from a rejection of Genesis. Charles Lyell, how did he come up with his theory of millions of years of slow gradualism? What's the word, Mr. Twinkles? You know that time of day where the coffee is worn off and your brain has decided to quit and it's called it a day, but your mouth doesn't know it yet? I think we've hit that part of the day. Uniformitarianism. Charles Lyell came up with uniformitarianism, and he admits it in his own words, not in his public writing, but in his private writing, that his goal is to get people to reject the history of the world according to Moses, as he calls it, or, the Genesis accounts of creation and the flood. And so he's decided, instead of attacking the Bible directly, to just present what he is claiming to be a scientific model of a different creation account. Basically, he's inventing his own beginning mythology and pretending that it's science so that he can subvert what is in the Bible. But that makes all of that anti-religious and not scientific. I mean, that's where it came from. And so that's why there's that overlap. So when science is actually based on observation, it defends biblical cosmology, it defends the biblical creation, the account of the flood. All of that is best explained by the biblical account and timeline of creation and the flood. Other things, you have to first reject that, and then a lot of the observations don't fit. Evolution makes you believe that you can add by subtracting. There's a whole lot of things in ancient Earth, the geology, that not only we never observed, but just sort of defy common sense. Like, the only way you can get to explain certain features by that model is, well, the continents just kind of bob up and down, and sometimes they just sink, get covered in ocean, and sometimes they pop back up, and now they're mountains. I'm like, okay, except that, physics, right? Density, it can't work. Art Maven continues. Secondly, Darwin's theory of evolution has nothing whatsoever to do with your two questions. Darwin's theory does one thing. It offers a tentative explanation for observed biological diversity. That's all it does. It definitely does not offer answers for the two questions you pose, not in any way. Well, you know what's funny about that is he's absolutely right. That Darwin's theory of evolution does nothing to explain where the universe came from, where the earth came from, where life came from, where plants or animals came from, where fish or lizards came from. It does nothing to explain the variety of life on Earth, the different kinds of life that we find on Earth. What it shows is a possible explanation for observed biological diversity. That's true. Why are there multiple kinds of chickens? The mechanisms of Darwinian evolution do explain how a population of chickens can diversify into a more diverse population of chickens, or how a diverse population of chickens can become a less diverse population of chickens. But that's all it does. So what this guy is talking about here is actual Darwinian evolution. But that's not what people think of when they think of Darwinian evolution. Let me clarify. What he's described there is what Darwin actually talked about and actually tried to give evidence for in his books, in Origin of Species. That's it. All Charles Darwin was talking about is the diversification of a population, or the going the other way, where a diverse population becomes less diverse. He absolutely did nothing, or didn't even try to show that worms could, over many generations and lots of time, become fish, which over many generations and time became mammals. He never even tried to prove that. It was something that he would postulate in other writings as like, well, maybe given the right circumstances, and I don't know, and the fossils sure don't prove it, but, it was his religious explanation for where things came from once he had rejected the Bible. But No, Darwin never tried to prove that fish could turn into lizards and lizards could turn into people. He never tried to do that, but that's what most people think of in terms of Darwinian evolution. This guy's explanation is actually what Darwin did talk about, and yet, despite the fact that this description of Darwinian evolution is correct, when people try to defend it and put it against biblical creation, they're not thinking, well, how do you get a population of chickens to become a more diverse population of chickens? How does that happen? Most people think, well, we evolved from fish. We evolved from lizards. We evolved from apes. That's what they're thinking. This is the muddled blend of dumb that is this debate. Oh, this is why people like me spend our free time and our imaginary cats sitting here trying to explain to you the purpose and the evidence and the arguments for this. So let me clarify all of that, because this is the greatest thing. I'm just going to talk about just that section right there. This section above me here. Darwin's theory of evolution has nothing whatsoever to do with your two questions. Now, let's see what he's talking about in terms of the two questions. I was talking about why are we here and why is there something instead of nothing? Yes, that is correct. That Darwin does nothing about those two questions. So, the reality of Darwin's model of evolution, as he recorded it in his book, in Origin of Species, Darwin does absolutely nothing to try to explain the origin of life, the origin of the human race, or anything like that. What Darwin talks about, and what he tries to show through example, is the diversification of a biological population. So, sheep. Why are there multiple kinds of sheep instead of just identical clone sheep? He didn't know anything about genetics, so he had just a fragmentary part of the information that he needed. He didn't know anything about genes, anything real about how hereditary traits get passed on. He didn't know any of that. But what he did talk about is the fact that there is the ability for different variations to show up in a population. So if you've got a population of sheep, maybe they're all white. And then sometime a sheep that's white with black spots is born. You go, where did that come from? Like, in the vaguest, most obscure version of evolution, you'd say, well, that's evolution. It's a change over time. Okay, but the genetics for black fur or wool, that already existed in the population, but it's a recessive gene, and so it doesn't show up. For some reason, the genes of these two parent sheep produced a sheep that had black spots. And if you go back in the population enough generations, you're probably going to find that exact same trait in other sheep from previous generations. It shows up again. It shows up rarely because it is a recessive trait, and this is kind of how these things work. Sometimes traits combine so that you've got, let's say, a black sheep and a white sheep, and they mate and produce gray sheep. Well, where did that come from? It's a biological change. That's evolution. No, it is what Darwin was describing, but it's not the kind of change that will turn fish into lizards or lizards into mammals or mammals into, the apes that become people on that model. That kind of change is the shuffling of genes that already exist. All right, in order to go from fish to human being, you have to add a lot of genes that humans have that fish do not have. The kind of thing Darwin is talking about, which this person acknowledges, is just that shuffling of genes that already exist. You've got sheep, and you've got sheep. They have the genes that make sheep. They shuffle those genes to make a new collection of sheep with sheep genes. That's just shuffling what was already there. Sometimes you have mutations which break genes and make them go away. Now you have fewer genes, fewer possibilities for future generations. You have less diversity in the population. That's subtraction. Or through various means, you lose genes, you lose genetic information. Look at the poodle. The poodle comes from a more diverse collection of genes, and those genes get whittled out and broken and lost and whittled out. The poodle now is a genetic nightmare because while it's very different than the ancestor wolf population it came from 1,000 years ago, it doesn't have all of those genes. It's different. That's a change. That's the kind of change Darwin talked about, but it is not the kind of change that will turn a fish into a lizard or a lizard into an ape or an ape into a man. Those are two entirely different things. This is why, as a biblical creationist, we have to constantly explain the difference between the microevolutionary changes and the macroevolutionary changes. Microevolution is just that adaptation, that black sheep and white sheep mate and create gray sheep. Gray, that's a new variety of sheep that didn't exist in this population. That's a change in allele frequency. That looks different. That's a change. But it doesn't matter how many times you do that for how many generations or how many billions of years you want to pretend it's happened. That will never turn sheep into anything other than sheep. Therefore, that is not an evolutionary change in that macroevolutionary sense. If you have fish mating with fish, you got red fish, blue fish, one fish, two fish, and they mate, you will wind up with red fish, blue fish, maybe purple fish, maybe fish that are red and blue, but at the end of the day, or the end of the millennia, or the end of the billion years, they're still fish. Shuffling fish genes with fish genes will only create collections of fish genes. But that's what Darwin proposed, is the shuffling of fish genes, and then people went, well, if we extrapolate on that long enough, you get long enough timeline, fish will eventually turn into people. No, you can't shuffle fish genes and create people genes. If you've got a deck of cards, you've got a deck of ordinary poker cards, you can shuffle them for a billion years and you'll never make a single Uno card, let alone turn the whole thing into a deck of Uno cards. But that's what that macroevolutionary change requires, is that by shuffling or losing poker cards, you can make a deck of Uno cards. You can't add by subtracting. So the funny thing is with this argument here, he's right. What he doesn't realize, though, is that the position I'm arguing against doesn't know that he's right. And that's part of the problem with this argument. The evolutionary argument is always about getting people to define their terms, because the word evolution is so ambiguous and hazy that most people don't really know what they're defending, and sometimes they don't know what they're attacking. I'll acknowledge that. But this is why people like me have made a study of it, so that we can understand what we're talking about, and that's why I reject evolution, because I understand it. I don't reject this, that sheep can mate with sheep and make sheep that look different. I reject the idea that fish can mate with fish and create people, because that's stupid. It's not defensible by any stretch of the imagination, no observation, and no branch of science. But once you reject God and you throw out the Bible and you start there, well, where did fish and people come from? Well, maybe people used to be fish. Derp! So, I appreciate this comment. Thanks for writing in. So thanks for your comments, everybody, and don't forget to write good comments so we can give you good responses. From Mr. Twinkles and myself and all of us here at A Bit of Orange, Jesus loves you.